When Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of England, he said that he really didn't have a whole lot to offer except blood, sweat, toil, and tears. In the 19th century in Italy, there was a patriot very well known, very beloved by the Italian people, named Garibaldi. And he also said he was looking for people that would follow his cause. But he said that the road is going to be filled with hunger, with thirst, with battle, and with death. That he wasn't looking for people who would follow with their lips, but he was looking for people that would follow with their heart. It's along those same lines today that Jesus speaks to his apostles, to those who were closest to him. He also says to them, I want you to follow me, but I also need for you to understand what this is going to include. I would like for you to understand what discipleship is all about. So he starts out by asking, who do people say that I am? Jesus wasn't insecure. He wasn't having an identity crisis that he needed people to tell him who he was, but he was just kind of wondering. He threw that out there. Peter, kind of catches and he says, well, you're the Christ. You are the Messiah. And Jesus says, yes, that's true. And that's a pretty powerful title to take on. Jesus didn't deny it to that group. He said, don't go tell others, but he accepted that because the Christ, the Messiah, we have to understand that the people of Israel, they were waiting for thousands of years for the Messiah. So the words, you are the Christ, the Messiah, really Peter was saying, you're going to be like David. You're going to be like Solomon. You'll be like the great kings and the people who went to battle for years for the people, and they won for the nation of Israel. And along with that, there's going to be victory. There's going to be glory. All Peter was able to see was the end. He didn't realize that between that point on that trip to Caesarea Philippi and Jesus rising from the dead, the final victory, that there was going to be some suffering involved, and he denies that. He said, well, gosh, you can't tell me that there's going to be suffering, death before you rise. You see, all the people wanted to hear was, rising from the dead. They didn't realize what that meant, but they also didn't want to understand that there might be some pain involved in that as well. It was pain that the apostles really embraced because by following Jesus, it was more than lip service. They had to follow with their heart, with their hands, with their feet, with their eyes. They had to follow with their whole body because they ended up being martyred in the end. And that really was their passageway to glory. That in order to put on the crown of glory in the kingdom of heaven, that there was going to be a crown of thorns along the way. For them, there was going to be martyrdom. For them, there was going to be pain. That being a Christian was not going to be easy. And so really we have to look to the example of the apostles and say, well, how do we ourselves accept pain and suffering in our life? It's something that we're pretty well shielded from, because that's kind of the natural inclination of parents is they don't want their children to suffer. So we protect. That's just the natural way. God is no different. God doesn't want us to suffer. So when something very tragic happens in a family, someone has cancer, or someone is in a car accident, or there's difficulty in a relationship, there's divorce, or there's financial problems. These are all pretty major things. God didn't give them to us. But we can look at it and say, how can those sufferings, those significant emotional events in our life, help us to be a better follower of Christ? How can our pain and suffering be united on a cross? Because as Jesus said, in order to live, you will have to take up your cross and follow me. He didn't say the road was going to be easy. He said there's going to be problems in that. We often use that term, I have to take up my cross. This must be my cross. Well, a cross isn't like, a chronic pain in our finger. A cross is not our mother-in-law. Our cross is something that's a little bit bigger than that. You know, our cross is really something that, again, is a significant emotional event, a health crisis, major relationship issues, death and grief. Things in our life that really are going to make a difference and that we don't blame God for, but we bring God into it. How often is it that when we in our lives have some sort of suffering, some sort of great challenge, if we run away from God and we say, Lord, I'm going to blame you. Why did you give this to me? No, that's not the model Jesus is giving us today. He's saying, bring me into this. I want to walk with you because he himself in his humanity, God, knows more about suffering than we can ever imagine. And so God wants to protect us, but he knows it's part of our human condition. We may have to suffer. And what do we do with that? Well, I hope that we unite it with the cross, that we do pick it up, that we take it and we say, Lord, how can this suffering mold my heart to love you even more? How can the pain that I'm experiencing, the sadness, the challenge that I'm facing, how can it help me to grow in relationship with you? Especially, for instance, like if we're diagnosed with a major illness. Recently, I had a funeral for a woman. She was in her 40s. She had brain cancer. And you know, it was beautiful because I kind of walked the journey with her, but something that really came through in her whole time of suffering was she never once complained. Her mother said, you know, she never really shed a tear, but she kind of just accepted it and said, you know, I'm going to live the best that I can with this. And the doctors, they gave her 6 months, 2 years max to live. She lived for 6 or 7 years. Why? It was her whole attitude about it. It was how she embraced the cross that she was given. And I looked at her and I thought, wow, I felt like I was in the presence of a living saint, how she just very calmly accepted every turn, every time that something more difficult came her way, with no opportunity for healing. I think she was a living saint. That's what God wants for us as well. C.S. Lewis once said that our pains are shouted in and our pleasures are merely whispered. So our pleasure comes in a whisper and pain comes in a shout. See, when we have pain and suffering, when we have problems and challenges and sadness, what do we do with them? The beauty of our Christian faith is we don't sugarcoat it. The beauty of our Christian faith is we say, God, don't just whisper, yes, shout to me in this time. Talk to him, bring him into it, so that rather our road to sainthood is paved not with bitterness, but it's paved with a sense of accepting the cross, carrying it, and one day realizing the beautiful and incredible gift of resurrection and glory with him.